What's up, Reapers? My name's Seth, and we are back in some more Trove developer live stream notes. Already, like seriously, we're getting to this one actually a little bit earlier rather than late because this one's actually pretty interesting. They ended up talking about the rework that they're going to be doing to the Revenant. Yes, so we're going to be going into quite a bit of detail as to what they are going to end up actually changing with the Revenant. And then they also ended up mentioning that the next class that they're going to be working on after the Revenant is going to end up being the Ice Sage, which I wouldn't really hold my breath at which class they're going to end up actually working on, because honestly speaking, they said they were going to do the Boomeranger, they didn't. They said they were going to do the Chloromancer next, they swapped to the Revenant, now they're doing the Ice Sage next, and it's just blah, 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 blah. The train keeps turning. Who knows what they're going to end up doing. But what they're actually changing with the Revenant does sound very interesting. Personally speaking, he's never been a favorite class of mine, but I will end up swapping most of my Vanguard gear and gems over to my Revenant when he ends up actually getting this rework, which is going to be in the next big update, hopefully within a couple months. In either case, though, would appreciate if you would hit that like button, makes videos show up in searches and stuff. And without further ado, let's get to it. But before then, shout out to Shiro Kiri, because he is an absolute baller in creating these notes from the dev live stream, meaning that I don't have to siphon through hours of content trying to figure out what they were talking about, right? So anyways, this is all talking about the Revenant here, so let me actually swap over to this bad boy. Blah, 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 blah. I'm Top Hat Man. You should be able to throw your top hat. So the passive ability extends the health return and leech effect from the basic attack and the Bulwark Bash damage. So Bulwark Bash, that's going to end up being your right click, right? Yeah, so you're going to end up getting, I guess, a lot more health regen. Or not health regen, but health steal from your basic attack and the shield itself. You're going to gain 5% based on the damage you do. Based on the damage you do, so meaning that the more damage that you actually have with this character, the more life steal you're going to have, which is very interesting because Trove doesn't really have a class that's like that, because it means that you're going to have to build your character for more damage to maximize the amount of life that you're actually stealing from an enemy. But you're going to have to simultaneously have enough health that you can actually sustain enough damage from Ultra Tower enemies that you don't end up getting just one shot and obliterated, and then the health steal doesn't matter. That's why I'm really interested to see how this ends up working. The leech now works correctly in Ultra Towers as well, and they are going to end up fixing this with Tomb Razors. So apparently life stealing didn't work in Shadow Towers for the Revenant or the Tomb Razor. Go figure. Who honestly knew, because we don't really use these characters in Shadow Towers very often. The basic attacks for the Revenant will now be able to apply a debuff on the target, increasing all incoming damage to the target by 5%. So you're going to be able to have it so that whatever enemies you end up tagging with your basic attack are going to have a chance to actually get that debuff, thus making the character that much more potent for farming with groups, because you're going to be able to get the Shadow Tower enemies to be quite weak, right? Basic attack damage has been increased by 300%. So that's 300% of your normal basic attack, which is not very strong, honestly speaking, and it's very, very slow, most of all because I don't have attack speed gear or anything like that. But what I'd be interested to see is if you actually have your character strong enough, does that mean you're going to be able to one-shot a U9 boss with a basic attack? Could actually throw the Revenant over the top as far as a U9 farmer is concerned. Ultra Towers is going to remain to be seen, but anyways, they reduced the cooldown from 7 seconds to 5 on the Bulwark Bash, so you're going to be able to spam your shield bash even more so when you end up getting, I guess, like your Classroom ability, right? So they increased the size of the cone attack to ease it hitting multiple targets. I'm not sure if they're talking about the cone attack being your number 1 or if they're talking about the Bulwark Bash again. I'm assuming they're talking about the Bash, because they also mentioned that Spirit Spears, more specifically, will now use physical damage instead of max health for its damage increase. So your number 1 ability, oddly enough, was actually based off of your max health. Now they're actually just going to scrap that and make it so that it ends up just taking your raw physical damage, which interestingly enough, they also did mention that Spirit Spears is barely going to touch your health, as well as also being able to proc the life stealing. Reduce the health cost of Spirit Spears to 3% instead of 5% for each tick. Spirit Spears tick twice as fast now, so essentially that means that this attack is going to end up being twice as powerful because it's doing twice as much amount of damage within the same time frame, because you're doing like 2 attacks instead of 1, right? So that should be really cool. That it will end up being a very powerful ability for the Rev for sure. Maybe you'll end up going into a U9 dungeon. Bam, you do your number 1 and it's dead. Or you just hit it with a shield bash. Because you can still build the Revenant for U9 anyways. You know, you just do a speed build. You go and ram things with your shield. You don't really need attack speed on this character because of the fact that you're going to be using your right click. And that's not based on attack speed. That's based on a cooldown. But in either case, they increase the size of the cone for the Spirit Spears. So they're going to increase the size of the cone for your shield bash and for your Spirit Spears, so you should be able to handle groups a little bit better. Reduce the movement restriction when using Spirit Spears. Now, this is something that's very common that we've seen lately. They ended up actually changing that with the Knight as well, which the Knight is kind of an unsung hero that a lot of people don't really use. I think most of all because he's not very appealing as far as all the character classes are concerned. All of the other ones just seem a lot cooler, but the Knight is actually very, very viable for the end game since they ended up doing the rework for him. And one of the things that they did that made him single-handedly really, really great for farming U9 was the fact that you could actually use your class gym ability and keep moving at normal movement speed. So that means that the Revenant is going to be able to keep his movement speed. This is if you have movement speed gear, you gotta keep this in mind. And you're gonna be able to hold your number 1 and just be moving around at normal speed. So that's pretty crazy, dude. Like, that's gonna end up being very, very useful. So they also, the Revenants are immune to knockback when Spirit Spears are active. That doesn't really matter. I guess it'll be good for Shadow Towers, but you can't really spam 2 abilities at the same time. So we'll see whether or not this single-handedly is going to be the one attack that you're going to focus on, because it seems like it's getting the biggest rework. So your Spirit Storm, which is your ultimate attack, is not toggled anymore. So you're not going to be able to turn it on and then press the same button to turn it off. It's just going to end up casting, and it's going to end up having a 5-second duration. The health cost for the ability has also reduced slightly. And it also applies a snare effect to all enemies after the 5-second duration of the spell. So only after it ends up finishing the cast is it going to end up snaring the enemies, which again will end up making this character pretty good for Shadow Towers for the mid-tier for sure, because it means that you're not only going to be able to pull all the enemies in, but they're going to end up getting stunned afterwards, which is going to end up being very nice. Now, that said, are you going to end up having enough lifesteal that you're going to be able to survive taking that amount of damage as a Revenant? That's what I'm most curious about. The Spirit Blast released from your Spirit Storm ultimate ability will release twice as fast. Spirit Storm does 4 times more damage. His ultimate was always pretty good, actually. So that's pretty good that it does 4 times more. Spirit Storm will now also taunt enemies, and the pull is 20% larger, thus making it that much better and actually more viable than using the Candy Barb's class gym ability, because in more instances than not, with the current Revenant that we've got, it was actually better to end up just getting the class gym ability for the Candy Barb, because that was going to end up being like pretty much the exact same thing, right? So then the class gym ability, the Aegis Assault, I don't quite know how to pronounce it, but in either case, it gains the benefit of the Vengeful Spirit passive. So you're going to end up having that life leech and everything like that, right? You'll also gain 5% of the damage ult back as health. Has no cooldown. I'm not exactly sure what that means. I think it means you're going to get 5% of your damage that you deal back when your ultimate ends up ending. I don't quite know what that means. The damage over time effect will not give back health. Oh, I see. So they're just setting it up in a specific way, so you're going to end up getting life stealing from a different method or something. Okay, anyways, and then the subclass ability, this is pretty cool. So returns health while damaging enemies by 1/3 of a second cooldown. Maybe changed. Starts at 1% up to 3.5%. Now, what that means is that the subclass ability for the Revenant, you're going to actually be able to use it on other characters to give yourself 1% lifesteal, or if your power rank is stronger with your Revenant, up to 25,000 PR for your Revenant, I guess I would say, then you would end up having 3.5% lifesteal. Now, that stacked on top of a Prowling Shadow, actually, I don't want to type it in or my game will crash, but a Prowling Shadow or a Samantha, which also end up giving even more lifesteal. And we could actually see a lot of characters single-handedly become very, very tanky just because of this. I'm really interested to see Shadow Hunter. That would end up being a very, very good character that you could end up using with this particular build, because having lifesteal on lifesteal, I don't know, man. Really, really interested to see what ends up happening with it, dude. It sounds really, really cool. But in either case, while there are a bunch of other patch notes, I think for today, that's going to do it for us. We're just going to focus on the Revenant stuff. And this has not gone live. I want to make that perfectly clear. These updates that the developers ended up talking about are going to end up happening probably within the next couple months when the next big Trove update ends up coming out, which apparently is also simultaneously going to end up reworking PvP. So we'll just see what ends up happening with that, right? But in either case, it's cool that the Revenant is going to end up being a little bit more at the forefront. I love the fact that they're rebuffing the classes and they're not afraid to change them completely and change the way that they operate and make them a little bit more fun. I didn't know that we were going to be able to keep our movement speed from our #1 ability, because that's going to end up being really cool. So in either case, thanks for watching, everybody. Very much appreciate it. Don't forget to like, share, favorite, and subscribe for more daily content. I'm going to have a separate video that'll talk about the rest of the stuff that the devs ended up talking about, just so that we can focus this one specifically on the Revenant, because I don't want this video to be too long for you guys. But in either case, if you want to support me, you can always sponsor my YouTube channel or check links in the description for my merch store, as well as Gawkbox, which is a way you can donate to me for free. Sayonara and stay epic, everybody.